Hey friend, before we cozy in, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and how old you are. I love picturing our little sleepy community on the map. If this gentle corner of the internet helps you unwind, a soft tap on the like button and a quiet subscribe would mean a lot. Now, dim the lights. Let's drift back to radio nights. The room is already whispering to itself before anyone speaks, the hush of evening settling into the curtains, the soft tick of a clock with an honest wooden heartbeat, the faintest murmur of traffic far off like a river that forgot to sleep. One lamp, shaded in amber, spills a small lake of warmth across the rug, leaving the corners hushed and friendly. The radio cabinet, polished walnut a little scuffed at the feet, holds its place like a dignified guest who's been invited every night for years. Someone nudges a footstool closer. Another person tucks their legs under a blanket that remembers the shape of everyone it's ever kept warm. Slippers find their partners. A book is placed face down, its spine grateful for the rest. The air smells like tea that has just stopped steaming, and a hint of furniture polish that still carries the lemony promise of daylight. A cat performs a careful knead on the armrest and settles into a puddle of contentment, as though it's part of the upholstery's original plan. The radio's dial sits quiet for the moment, but it glows faintly, a moon behind fabric, waiting to be convinced into speech. In kitchens, plates whisper against one another, rinsed and stacked. A towel hangs like a flag, declaring that the day's work is off duty. Doors close with considerate clicks. From the hallway, socks skim the floor, a slow shuffling rhythm that means the house is entering its low tide. Someone clears their throat for no reason except to acknowledge the ceremony ahead. The cushion sighs as weight meets it. The springs answer softly with the kind of memory only old furniture keeps. A catalogue of nights exactly like this, and just different enough to matter. The blanket travels, passed from lap to lap in a small negotiation of who needs it most, until it ends in a compromise that warms everybody. A cup is lifted, tilted, set down again with that rounded ceramic sound that always lands a little deeper than you expect. The radio's wooden side feels cool to the fingertips. The cloth grill surrenders a whisper of dust, like opening a forgotten book. Hands hover near the controls out of habit, not yet turning, savouring the pause the way one lingers at the first step of a staircase before beginning the climb. Breathing in the room becomes a shared tempo, a close domestic waltz. 3 counts of inhale, 3 counts of quiet. In the window the night holds steady, just the faint reflection of the lamp, and beyond it the suggestion of her neighbours performing their own small rituals, different in details but faithful to the same intention. Somewhere a radiator taps once, testing its voice, then decides it has said enough. Shadows overlap in big soft shapes on the rug. The dome of the lampshade, the slope of shoulders, the square shoulders of the radio itself, everything arranged in slow conversation that needs no words. On the bookshelf a photograph leans in its frame. 2 smiles paused mid-century, still approving of the room's arrangement. The clock face is patient and round, its second hand a polite traveller who never hurries and never lingers, evenly stitching one quiet moment to the next. Nearby, the sugar bowl's lid chimes a tiny porcelain note, and a spoon answers with a muted tap against a saucer, the domestic equivalent of a nod. The air has that gentle, lived-in coolness of late evening, the kind that makes the lamp's circle feel almost like a hearth. A sweater draped over the chair back becomes a shoulder offered to anyone whose own shoulders haven't fully shrugged off the day. Across the room, a pile of mail is squared into neatness and set aside, tomorrow's errands fenced politely away from tonight's sanctuary. Even the floorboards seem to settle into their places, the house becoming a single piece, like a choir finding the note it prefers. Fingers travel the radio's carved edges, pausing where the varnish has thinned to silk. You can sense the weight of all the previous nights layered here, Winter evenings with breath at the window, late summers when the curtains barely stirred, storms that talked to the roof while the radio told calmer stories, each memory leaving a faint fingerprint you feel rather than see. The room accepts the gathering like a knowing host. It understands that this is the hour when the world shrinks to a manageable size, and the mind at last can exhale. No one rushes the moment. There is a comfort in the interim, the way a lullaby sometimes begins with silence and everyone leans just a fraction closer to the cabinet as though the space between anticipation and sound is its own kind of music. The dial waits, half-lit and patient, while the hands that know it best hover one breath away from the first gentle turn. First the small courtesies, a palm resting on the cabinet to borrow its cool, steadying presence, a thumb finding the shallow dimple time has polished into the volume knob, the soft click that announces we've moved from quiet expectation to the gentle business of sound. A low hum unfurls, hardly louder than breath, and somewhere deep inside the wooden belly tiny filaments wake like fireflies behind gauze. The pilot light kindles to life, amber, patient, and the room's shadows make room for the glow. Warm dust rises with a scent like old books and fresh toast, that unmistakable radio perfume that says you are about to hear something that travelled through darkness to find you. Fingers slide to the tuning wheel, and its ridged edge greets them like a familiar handshake. The slightest turn and the room fills with distant weather, soft static like wind through pines, a faint hiss as though the ocean has sent a seashell to sit on the shelf. A bird-like whistle swoops and vanishes, a rogue station, a far-off oscillator, followed by a papery murmur that might be speech or memory, not yet sure which. Another careful turn. The dial's numbers drift under the little glass window, a slow parade of cities and frequencies. 540, 610, 700, each a different doorway, each with a town's heartbeat on the other side. You can hear the variable capacitor plates sliding closer and farther inside, a metal butterfly closing and opening its wings, feeling for the exact resonance where a voice turns from fog to face. A hand cups the side of the cabinet, as if to shelter the signal from any draught of inattention, and the tuning eye, green as a bottled summer, narrows its beam, then widens, then narrows again, a quiet semaphore that says closer, closer there. The sound sharpens in a sudden click of clarity, a saxophone threaded with applause, gone again with a sigh as the wrist overshoots, then back with the smallest nudge, landed like a teacup on a saucer. Volume up a breath. The station's call letters arrive in a friendly cadence, syllables crisp and proud, and with them the comfort of knowing you've pinned a distant star to your own ceiling. Another tiny adjustment, because perfection is always a hair's breadth away. The wheel moves as slowly as a minute hand, and the heterodyne whistles, a thin, glassy singing, slide off the edge of hearing, leaving behind the clean outline of a voice. Somewhere a hand on the aerial wire, just a pinch, just a lift away from the wall, makes the announcer step forward in the room as if he's gotten off a train and taken his hat off. An elbow shifts, the blanket rustles, the cat lifts its head, undecided about jazz. The announcer mentions a town several hours away, and the mind throws a line across map miles, imagining the transmitter tower like a lonely lighthouse blinking through ionized night. Another spin across the band, because part of the ritual is not stopping at the first safe harbour. There's a baseball game calling plays in staccato shorthand, a weather bulletin wrapped in barometric politeness, a sermon that sounds like someone smoothing out a wrinkled sheet, a drama rehearsing an argument with footsteps and thunder from a shaken tin sheet. The tuning wheel is steady as surgery, breath held on the turn, exhale on the lock, A dance with invisible partners whose shoes never touch the floor. The green tuning eye approves, its shadowed fan closing in a satisfied hush, then reopens, inviting another try, because the night is generous with possibilities. Static sometimes blooms like dandelion seed, soft and everywhere at once, and the trick is to tune through it rather than against it. You can feel where the clearest path is by the way the cabinet vibrates against your fingertips, a pulse that isn't quite sound and isn't quite silence, something in between, like remembering a song before you recall its words. The dial pointer glides past numbers that once meant nothing and now carry personality. Here's where the crooner lives, here the late night farm report with its harvest of words like loam and silo and dew point, here the city that never sleeps but politely pretends to whisper after dark. Occasionally lightning a county away stencils quick white cracks into the static, little fireworks you can't see but hear as sharp commas. The family is quiet except for the tiny language of comfort, socks sliding on rug, a spoon turning in cooling tea, the mutual tilt of heads that says hold it there. The volume tapers down for a breath, because quieting the world makes the voice step closer. Then it rises on a thumb's width to give the orchestra room to bloom, a ribbon of strings unrolling across the rug with the grace of someone laying a blanket for a picnic that will happen in the mind. If the signal fades, sky waves sighing as the ionosphere stretches and settles, you wait, because waiting is part of the ceremony. And like a shy guest, the station returns, smiling and slightly different, as though it took the long way around the block to arrive back at your door. A pencil and a dog-eared notebook may appear, because some listeners like to keep a log, date, time, frequency, station, a small victory recorded in neat letters, proof that you shook hands with the dark and it shook back. Sometimes the dial strays into distant languages that sound like rain beaded on unfamiliar leaves. Consonants chime like silver coins, vowels sway like a hammock, and you don't need to understand to be understood. The feeling is enough. You pause there too, because the ritual is both about finding and about letting yourself be found, and a voice 1,000 kilometers away can still make the living room feel like a little post office of the heart receiving messages that travel through cold air with their warmth intact. A tiny tilt of the cabinet, the slightest twist of the aerial just so, and a program sponsor slides into focus with a jingle you could hum while folding laundry, promising brighter whites and better mornings with a choir the size of a postage stamp. The tuning knob knows your touch now. It turns like a secret shared between old friends. You almost never look at your hand as it moves. You watch the tuning eye. You listen for the sweet spot where the breath in the announcer's words becomes audible, that soft human margin at the beginning and end of each sentence. A breath means you've arrived. The cabinet grows warm under your palm. Somewhere inside, tubes are drawing constellations with their filaments, little orange hieroglyphics spelling stay. The clock ticks, ignored but obeyed, and the band still holds more rooms to open, more doors to crack with the clever shape of frequency and patience. You hover in that tiny theatre of motion, a degree left, a hair right, a heartbeat of stillness, and the night yields another clear channel, a voice stepping across miles to sit down on the edge of the rug and speak like a friend who has always known the way to your house. They spoke as if they'd come by the house to check on you, coats shrugged off at the door, voice polished by courtesy and warmed by breath. The announcer's consonants were little brass buttons neatly fastened. The vowels were woolen and generous, full enough to keep a room from feeling drafty. Microphones in those days invited closeness, and the voices obliged, leaning in with a softness you could measure against your own heartbeat. You could hear the beginning of words, those tiny intakes of air the throat makes before a thought becomes sound, and the ends of them, rounded and set down like cups on saucers. The room obeyed their pace without being told, shoulders lowered, chins tipped forward. Even the clock seemed to tick a fraction more kindly. Some voices had the faintest ribbon of tobacco and winter in them. Others a clean morning brightness like linen hung in cold air. Others still a caramel dusk that unspooled in calm lengths. They didn't rush the hour because the hour wasn't meant to be outrun, it was meant to be held. There were different species of voice sharing the same night sky. Newsreaders with their metronome steadiness, delivering facts like a careful nurse, changing a bandage, no tugging, no flourish, just competence wrapped in respect. Comedians with a buoyancy that lifted every sentence a finger's width above the floor, so that the laugh, when it arrived like an affectionate ripple from the studio audience, could glide underneath and carry the moment a little farther. Storytellers with pockets full of hush, dipping into them for shadows and glimmers, letting a breath fall between two words so your own imagination could move into the space and arrange furniture there. Sportscasters who ran on a bright, quick stride, syllables strung like pennants across a breeze, punctuated by the glove pop of the crowd, cheers that came through the speaker softened but determined, like applause heard from the hallway of a theatre. Preachers with velvet thunder, teachers with chalk in their timbre, night shift hosts with a cup of coffee kindness that knew the names of truck stops and hospital corridors. Even when you didn't know the faces, you knew the rooms they carried, the echo of a vaulted studio, the close wool of a small booth, the low hum of an orchestra parked on the other side of the glass. The microphone taught them a special etiquette. Speak to one person, not to a crowd. That was why so many of them began with a greeting that sounded like it had a name stitched to it, even if the name was friend. When they said good evening, it was the sort of evening that could be folded and placed on your lap. When they said stay with us, it felt less like an instruction than an invitation to keep your socks warm for a little longer. You could sense the proximity effect, the way low notes bloom when a mouth moves close to the mesh. And that warmth lived not just in the bass, but in the feeling of being near someone who knew how to be gentle with your attention. They paused in the right places, letting the room breathe with them. They handled silence like a crystal. Touch it and it sings. Clench it and it shatters. Their cadence taught you how to settle. You began to match them without noticing, small nods in time with a paragraph, an exhale where the sentence ripened and fell. Letters from listeners sometimes arrived folded into the programme, and when a host read one you could hear a second voice braided through the first. Ink translated into breath, the paper creases audible in the tiny rasp between lines. "Dear Sir," it would begin, or "My children and I," and suddenly the living room was longer than its walls, elastic enough to hold kitchens you would never see, and porches that smelled like rain 1,000 kilometres away. The host would thank the writer in a tone that made gratitude seem like a profession. Then a song would begin, and the band, quiet as a promise, would come in with brushes whispering across the snare, a guitar chord the temperature of late autumn, a clarinet that behaved like a ribbon unfurling. Laughter from the studio when it came arrived not as a shove but as a blanket thrown lightly over the knees of the moment, warming everything it touched without even smothering. Commercial voices had their own bedtime manners. Jingles wore pleasantly simple clothes, harmonies walking arm in arm, lyrics tidy and rhymed like sheets tucked properly under a mattress. A sponsor read wasn't a barked command, it was a neighbour leaning over the fence with a recommendation and 2 spare coupons. Even the sparkle of salesmanship had softened edges after dark. "Mornings are brighter," they would sing, and you caught yourself believing that brightness could be placed on the bedside table with your spectacles. Between segments, continuity announcers stitched the hour together with thread that never showed, guiding you from drama to dance band with the calm of someone who knows where all the light switches are and leaves them exactly as you like them. Children recognize their shepherds by sound alone. A storyteller who specialised in bedtime tales had a voice that made pillows taller. The sibilance of their speech ran like gentle tidewater across shells on a beach. "Close your eyes," they'd say, and eyes closed, even if you intended only to rest them for a moment. They didn't condescend, they understood that children are alert to falseness, the way cats are alert to invisible drafts. Their worlds were made of careful details, the weight of a wooden pail, the sound of a wool coat shrugged from shoulders, the polite thunk of a latch. Parents listened too, grateful to let a trustworthy voice carry the last bridge of the day, and when the story paused for a theme played on a glockenspiel, a constellation of notes hung like small friendly stars. The house grew itself a sky. Night shift voices had secrets of their own. They spoke to bakers putting trays into ovens, to conductors glancing down empty platforms, to nurses slipping thermometers under patient tongues with the kind of quiet that has a soul. They knew which towns smelled like yeast at 4 a.m. and which roads wore frost like silk. "If you're out there," they'd say, not asking for proof, "I'm here," turning the pronouns into a bridge you could cross without looking down. They read the shipping forecast, and even for people who had never seen an open sea, the litany of coastal names and wind directions felt like a prayer with salt on it. They played records with the surface hiss like falling snow and cued them by fingertip, feeling the groove wake up under the stylus. The first second of music arriving like someone stepping into the lamplight and smiling because they recognize you. Accents wandered in and out like travelling cousins, each carrying their region in a suitcase packed with vowels, a Midwest roundness buttered with kindness, a clipped New England consonant that made you sit up straighter without resenting it, a Southern glide with porch swing patience, city sharpness softened by midnight. The radio didn't flatten them, it carried the geography as a courtesy, letting the map speak inside the music of the sentence. Sometimes, between songs, a guest would chuckle in a way that told you their eyes had crinkled. Sometimes a bandleader would speak in a low stage whisper, meant for the musicians and meant for you too, letting you feel the line between audience and orchestra as a threshold, not a wall. And then the needle would fall again, a hush like a held breath, and a chorus would bloom out of the velvet of the air, the harmonies pitched exactly at the place where reassurance lives. Even the news at the top of the hour, the little chime, the measured voice learned the language of tucking in. Headlines were offered in straight lines, but never with a raised voice, as if the world could be known without being bellowed. Weather came on padded feet, forecast a modest quilt of tomorrow's temperatures, winds decided in kitchen tones, a chance of showers sounding more like an invitation than a threat. Time checks were rounded and human, 2 minutes past 11, as if they saw you glancing at the clock and smiled. And when the host returned, you could feel the small realignment of the room, everyone back under the same blanket of attention, the voice once more addressing a single chair that happened to be occupied in many houses at once. Somewhere between the microphone and your ear, the tubes inside the set breathed a soft orange patience into every syllable. Compression and bandwidth limits wrapped the sound in a gentle shawl so that nothing poked or bit. Even when cymbals sighed or a crowd rose in celebration, the edges rounded, and somehow the rounding felt like kindness rather than loss. Breath became part of the instrument. A lifted eyebrow in the studio translated into a lifted corner of your mouth at home. You began to recognize the hosts by their pauses as much as their words. This one settled at the end of a sentence like a bird on a branch. That one left a sliver of daylight after a joke for you to step into. Another carried a hum in the back of the throat that made every introduction taste faintly of honey. They were strangers by fact and familiar by sound. And when they spoke your name without knowing it, friend, folks, you there in the quiet, the room answered by getting a little warmer, the lamp a little more golden, the rug a little softer, as if the voice had reached out of the speaker, not to knock or to demand, but simply to tuck the edges of the evening around you and smooth them flat with a practiced hand. The door opens first, though no door has moved. Just a strip of creaking leather pulled slow across a wooden frame, a hinge voiced by a careful hand that knows exactly how much weight a room sounds like. Footsteps cross a hallway made of a sandbox in a wood tray. The actor chooses gravel for a lane, cornmeal for a quiet country road, marble chips for a city sidewalk, each step cued by a fingertip conductor so that one character's stride is brisk and narrow, while another's is wide and weary. A coat comes off with the ripe whisper of wax paper. A hat gets set down with the clop of a hollowed coconut shell. When the wind must rise, a stagehand rolls a canvas on a spindle. Slow for a warning breeze, fast for a gale that rattles the imagined panes. Rain begins as a palm sifting rice through a sieve. It thickens when the sieve is closer to the microphone, turns to sleet when a handful of dried peas are thrown into the fall, grows into a roof-thumping storm when a tin sheet is trembled like the skin of a drum. Thunder is a bowling ball coaxed across a hollow box, the rumble blooming and receding in a practiced arc, and lightning is a whip of white noise torn from a paper envelope held across the mic. The papers tear a bright vein in the dark. A door bolt is nothing but a butter knife against a wooden ruler. A gunshot is a clap backed with a snapped celery stalk to give it bone. A sword fight is two fireplace pokers with their rhythms choreographed like a waltz. The Foley table is a crowded city of small, miraculous lies. A tray of keys labelled by mood, cheery jingle for a comic landlord, solemn chime for the museum gallery, glassware tuned to different pitches for restaurants grand and humble, a basin of water to birth oceans, bathtubs, harbours, rain barrels, and final sips. A horse arrives on a pair of coconut halves, but it breathes because the actor remembers to breathe, and it seems to turn its head because the sound turns as the shells do, left to right, farther, nearer, with a human hand's patience. A train gathers itself from a brush on a snare drum for steel on steel, a teapot's sigh for steam, a ratcheting box for the clickety cadence, and the low dignity of a double bass, bowed in short strokes for the weight of the engine. When the conductor calls out, the studio floor maps become stations in the mind, and a leather suitcase set down gently is all the platform needs to exist. If a crowd is required, 5 actors become 50 by turning away from the microphone and speaking in a softened nonsense. Peaches and bicycles and Tuesday repeated into a collective murmur, then pivoting closer for a cheer that never quite pierces because the engineer has placed the ceiling for loudness where comfort lives. On nights when the sea must be visible to the ear, the basin's surface is ruffled by a fan at arm's length, and a handful of suds persuades the water to whisper like distance. Ropes creak with a bow drawn over resin-darkened hemp. A gull is a reed whistle kissed around the edges by someone who has watched the birds long enough to know how they hesitate in mid-cry. A ship's bell is a glass struck with a spoon whose handle has been wrapped in cloth, because the harbour at night is never harsh. When snow needs to fall, cornstarch in a leather pouch squeezed with slow, even pressure gives the muffled hush of a world that has agreed to speak more quietly. A window frost is cellophane crinkled just off-axis, barely audible but perfectly seen by the imagination, which happily paints frost where it is invited. Every object on the table is humble, and every effect is grand, and the operator's posture, half magician, half tailor, stitches a world that holds together, because the seams have been pressed flat by attention. Between scenes, a sponsor takes the floor with a jingle you could whistle while rinsing cups. 3 or 4 voices, clean and smiling, step into harmony, like neighbours carrying pies, the melody walking an easy staircase anyone can climb. Bright mornings, they sing, and a triangle tinctures the air with a glint of sunlight. Wooden blocks become a breakfast table, a cereal pours dry rice murmuring into a ceramic bowl, and the spoon's first tap tells you it's Saturday. Coffee appears as a kettle's single-note throat-clear introduction, followed by the soft percolator pluck of bubbles nudging glass. Plink, plonk, content as a cat. The announcer says the brand name with the clarity of someone pronouncing a friend's surname correctly, then shares a small domestic promise about whiter shirts or quicker suds. You can hear the smile because the band behind him lays a carpet of horns at a conversational volume, a polite swagger that never steps on a noun. When the jingle reprises with a shorter tag, it lands like someone finishing your sentence, and both of you laughing because you're already there. The engineer at the board governs air the way a watchmaker governs seconds. Fingers rest on faders that move in breaths, not in leaps. Compression brushes the peaks until they shimmer politely. The noise floor is lifted just enough to keep silence from feeling like absence, and reverberation, when it's sprinkled at all, is the time of a small room, because the show wants to live with you, not on a stage. He has a pencil behind one ear and a stopwatch ticking in his pocket, and he leans in when the crackle of a paper bag tries to bully the transition, rolling the high end down with a twist so that the bag becomes merely part of the story, not the story itself. If a performer's laughter goes longer than the script's margin allows, the engineer trims it invisibly by dipping music in under it. A friendly signal to rejoin the road, the way a host refills a guest's glass to keep the conversation gliding. The cue light blooms and dims, a red blossom that tells the room when breath should be silent and when breath may resume its gentle duties. Back at the table, chaos behaves because it has been rehearsed. The effect artist counts silently. 4 for the footfall, 2 for the key, 3 for the latch, and when the detective mutters, "I know you're in," there, the room knows, because the latch's 3 counts arrive like proof. Bouquet of newspapers, some thin, some thick, wait to be folded in exact ways. Thin for a quick page turn, thick for Sunday importance, a neat rustle to signal morning, a sloppier one to signal urgency and rain. A telephone rings as a real bell, but slimmer, sweeter, its clapper muffled with felt for neighbourly courtesy. When it is answered, the receiver's hollow joins the voice, created by a small metal cup between mouth and microphone, so that 2 realities nest without argument. A car goes by as a hand-cranked siren dipped low and then high, Doppler stitched with a small knob twist that sweeps frequency like a nod in passing. A city breathes on cue and a distant horn, half-muted trumpet, half-human hum, threads the scene from the far side of the studio, never too close because distance is something sound can wear like clothing. Characters enter and exit by turning their faces, not their feet. Step nearer, and the voice grows warm. Step aside, and it cools. Speak over your shoulder, and the line carries a street you can almost see. A kiss is not smacked, but brushed. The sound of a fingertip along the back of a hand near the microphone. Because the ear believes in restraint. A slap when a story insists. Is cloth cracked sharp against a thigh, followed by an actor's sharp inhale. A door slammed in anger is never the studio door. It's a drawer slapped and a board dropped together, controlled and convincing, the anger expressed without wounding the room. The rules are old and generous. Never hurt the microphone, never surprise the engineer, never step on the line that belongs to silence. Within those rules, anything can happen. A jungle wakes from a box of birdsong whistles and a shaker full of dried beans. A spaceport hums from a chorus of combs wrapped in tissue paper. A haunted house speaks in a bicycle wheel spun with a wax paper banner. None of it claims to be real. All of it convinces, because the conviction lives not in the object but in the intention gathered around it. Music carries the seams between moments. A cue from the bandleader. One finger, two, sets the pianist on a velvet walk, and the clarinet draws a line so thin you could thread a needle with it. Brushes whisper over a snare like someone sweeping crumbs off a linen cloth. Bass counts heartbeats that everyone can share, and a muted trumpet writes a smile in the air without any need to show teeth. The theme is short and generous. It knows when to bow out so that a line of dialogue can find the room unaccompanied, and it knows when to return to escort that line across a street. Even silence is coloured by the residue of music, a warmth that remains in the speaker's cloth for a bar or two after the band's hands have lifted. In the control room, a second hand races in tiny ticks toward the station break, and the dance of cues sharpens. Cards shuffle in the announcer's hand. Sponsor copy, station ID, a weather line, each card corner curled from rehearsals. He reads with the care of someone placing plates on a crowded table, leaving space, touching nothing that doesn't belong to him. The sponsor's name is pronounced with the dignity granted to proper nouns and grandmothers. The weather is smiled through even when it promises wind. A pen taps the desk once, a personal metronome, and the finger lifts the talkback switch to send a quiet "ready" that you will never hear but somehow always feel. When the red light flowers again, the universe compresses to a circle of fabric stretched across a ring, and words step through that circle in single file, wearing the shapes that the hands at the Foley table, the band at their stands, and the engineer at his faders have tailored for them. Each sound a little lantern that lets your imagination stroll farther into rooms you have never visited, and nevertheless recognizes your own, because sound is the kind of map that asks you to draw the landmarks as you go and rewards you for drawing generously. It could happen in the middle of a joke, in the middle of a chorus, in the middle of you buttering a roll, the tiny cough of the newsroom cutting in, the music fading like someone pinching the wick of a candle, a chime, a tone, a pause that learned its manners from church aisles, and then a voice you knew but heard differently now. Syllables trimmed of ornament, soft edges tucked in. "We interrupt." The room adjusted itself without anyone moving, cups held still in mid-air, eyes finding the radio cabinet as if it had just raised a hand. The announcer's pace changed to the rhythm of paper being read the second it arrived, type still warm, a paragraph folded over a finger. Somewhere behind that voice, whether you could hear it or not, a typewriter hammered out letters in quick square breaths. A wire machine tinged a bell when a new bulletin slid through with ink damp enough to smudge a cuff. The station's heart pivoted from storytelling to witnessing with a turn of a knob and a shared intake of breath that seemed to include every living room on the block. Sports packed whole counties into a single sentence. A baseball call crackled with a bright high wire. The pitch, the swing, a human voice expanding to the size of a stadium and then thinner, then wide again with the crowd's roar riding it like a kite tail. You could hear the outfield become a geography lesson. The gap, the wall, the track, all mapped by the announcer's verbs. A home run landed on your rug the same way it landed and left, with a thump in the chest that startled the cat and made somebody's knuckles rap the end table twice. For luck they pretended not to believe in. A boxing round was leather kisses, and a bell with a worn, honest clang, the cadence of two hearts trying to persuade each other. A horse race was braided syllables, announcer galloping, names a necklace of music, bay, chestnut, dark gelding, hooves invented by a rolling rattle, an audience thunder channeled into your quiet street where only porch lights knew it was night. When the winning call snapped into place, by a nose, by a length, you could feel neighbours on the other side of the hedges laughing or groaning at the same instant, strangers synchronated by a wire you couldn't see but could absolutely feel. News made the room lean forward. Weather turned from conversational to consequential with isobars spoken aloud. Watch, warning, south-southwest winds coming with a shoulder. The farm report, usually a gentle piano of moisture and markets, stiffened into purpose when a late frost was on its way. Temperatures like small math problems delivered plainly, so you could tuck sheets over tomatoes and bring the potted herbs inside. Flood stages arrived as numbers and became sandbags as you listened, became shovels and neighbours and boots drying by stoves. A factory strike gathered itself in two voices, a union man measured and low, a company spokesman careful and smooth, each held by the announcer's firm politeness as if he were placing chairs the exact right distance apart at a table that wanted to wobble. Election wore the sound of pencils tallying and telephones breathing, counties flipping like cards, a map you could not see but could recite in your sleep by midnight. "Too close to call," the voice would say, and the room understood the virtue of patience in a way it rarely practiced at any other hour. There were nights when the station braided the world directly into your hands. A correspondent joined by long-distance lines spoke through a gauzy veil of hiss, his first words often apologising for the distance, and you could hear the wind that had crossed an ocean hitch, a ride on the wire. Street noise from another city arrived like a postcard's edge. Car horns pitched differently, footsteps on a stone you didn't have in your town, a church bell with a time zone inside it. The delay between the host's question and the answer was a tangible thing, a few fat heartbeats during which everyone's mouth closed, letting the answer travel those miles with the dignity it deserved. You learned that the world's events came in flavours of sound. Demonstrations with a cloth of chant in the background, parades with brass polished loud then receding round a corner, solemnities with the air itself lowering its voice. The field mic, when it failed and came back, made the relief in the correspondence exhale into news too. Sometimes the voice carried something heavier than the day's routine cargoes, an accident, a fire, a lost name carefully, with confirmations and corrections tied together like knots you check twice. The announcer's grammar squared its shoulders. Adjectives stepped aside to make room for dates, crossroads, the names of streets, the names of people delivered with the care of someone carrying water in both hands. The room understood and behaved accordingly. Even children who didn't grasp the particulars felt the change in air pressure and climbed closer into blankets. Phones rang next door and then went still. A siren went by outside and was allowed to finish its sentence. In the pauses, you could hear the set's tubes breathing their small, steady orange breaths, untroubled and faithful. On other nights, the voice arrived like a friend with a chair pulled close and speaking about policy and fear and hope in promises shaped to fit inside a living room. People called those talks different names, addresses, chats, messages, but the sensation was the same, the government sitting in your lamplight and remembering to speak in kitchen words. You could hear the paper turn, not rushed, and the paragraph breaks had manners. Arguments made their case the way a neighbour does when they want you to understand them and like them both. Disagreements answered the next day on another programme, equally practised, a conversation drawn across evenings like a string you could follow around the nails of weeks and months. There were sounds that curled a hand under the day and lifted it gently toward tomorrow. The time signal before the hour, pips like tiny tuned stars, taught the clock on the mantel how to behave. The weather at night folded a map over your shoulders. Fog near the river, clearer north of the viaduct, frost where the fields opened themselves to the sky's cold mouth. Obituaries read with respect threaded together the town you lived in. Names you knew, names you only knew by the way your grocer once said hello to them. All spoken with a care that made silence afterward the right kind. Lost and found announcements turned practical into tender. A brown dog with a white sock on his left forepaw. A detail so precise it fetched tears and smiles, and sometimes the dog. School closings were a choir in winter. The phonics of the district names sang like a hymn, and children listening pretended not to hope before allowing themselves to. War, when it spent its coins, paid mostly in sound. Marches were printed in drums and brass, but the voices carried the weight. Correspondence describing lines and bridges and skies sown with plains. Their words slowed not by caution but by the need to put each one exactly on its footprint. Letters from soldiers were read with permission, and the clean stitch of the reader's throat made the paper real in your mind. You could feel the fold, see the stain where a pocket had kept it. Homefront updates listed ration books and schedules, who should collect where and when, how to save this, substitute that, and you could hear recipes adapting, travel plans learning to ride with strangers, a giant house learning to make do without losing its dignity. Air raid drills passed through the schedule like a ruler's edge, and even if the siren you heard was only a test, you stood a little straighter in your socks, the body understanding ritual before the mind had finished reading the script. Joy came as news too, sometimes in the simple flourish of a parade described street by street for those who could not go, sometimes in the ride of a voice when a ship came into harbour bearing a band and 1,000 handkerchiefs, sometimes in a crowd singing itself into one organism that didn't need rehearsal to stay on pitch. Announcements of firsts, first flights, first records, first barriers stepped over, had a particular music, the way the announcer let awe into the room without giving up professionalism, as though awe itself were part of the job. The station took care to let the sound of applause breathe, to let the confetti of voices spend itself, and then gathered you back gently, like a parent's hand on your shoulder at the edge of a crowd. Even small municipal business could glow when the radio carried it. The library will be open late on Thursdays, and you could feel card catalogues waiting like patient queens. The bridge on County 7 will be one lane, and the whole map lifted a brow and adjusted. The town choir's concert date, the school's fall play, the blood drive's location, these were not filler. They were stitches in the quilt that kept a place from unravelling. Sometimes the announcer would pronounce a name wrong and apologise the next night, and the apology itself stitched another seam, proof that voices could learn, that a place could correct itself without breaking the spell. Every so often the signal widened and let in the shortwave world. It arrived with the Varna perfume of distance flutter in the carrier, a soft sway like a ship on calm, and your living room stood up a little taller to receive it. A station from far north spoke in a daylight you did not currently own. A voice from farther south carried crickets louder, a heat you could hear. Language you did not share behaved like weather you could enjoy, roll of R, crisp snap of tea, vowels carrying baskets of fruit you could almost taste. The tuning eye blinked its green approval, and you understood that being a citizen of your small room and being a citizen of the world were not separate jobs. They were a braid you could feel under your palm on the cabinet, warm now from hours of duty and kindness. And always, when the bulletin had been read, when the score had been called, when the warning had been given, when the interview had spent itself to the very last polite nod, the station found its way back to the human scale. Not by pretending the larger thing hadn't happened, but by letting the next voice follow the same rules that made the first ones trustworthy. Speak plainly. Don't rush. Leave room for breath. Remember who you are talking to and where they are sitting. The world came through the speaker not like a flood that drowns the furniture, but like a river that learns your town's bends and carries newsboats past your window at a pace the heart can stand, so that when you set your cup down again and it kisses the saucer, the sound joins everything else on the frequency of a life that keeps reaching for the dial and, with a practiced hand, finding the station that makes the far and the near share a vocabulary you can live inside. The tradition puts on different clothes, but the body underneath is the same, a ritual of shrinking the world to a comfortable size and letting a voice draw the map. Screens dim not because anyone ordered them to, but because the evening persuades them. Blue light slides down to amber, night shift clocks in on phones and laptops, and the room learns to be softly reflective instead of shiny. A smart speaker sits like a round, polite candle on the shelf, waiting for a whisper that is also a password. Play the station, cue the show, take me to the story that knows how to carry me. The old tuning knob has become a swipe, a glass river you skim with your thumb. The static has become buffering, a small circling comet that says just a breath. And then there it is, a stream braided from servers and satellites and cables that travel under oceans like cautious whales. The first syllable arrives with the same courtesy as always. The voice lives in your room again, less an intrusion than a guest who hangs their coat on the same peg every time. Headphones turn attention into a private room, soft cups warmed by the minute, a tiny room within a room where stereo places instruments like chess pieces across the brain's table. Spatial audio walks a guitar a step to the left and seats the singer exactly where the lamp's light falls. Binaural field recordings slide a wooden door somewhere behind you, so convincingly your shoulders answer before your logic catches up. Sleep timers learn the old courtesies of station sign-offs, promising to set the story down gently after 30, after 45 at the end of this chapter, at the second chorus of the next song. Notification silencing grows fussy like a good butler. Not now, not that one. Messages can wait in the foyer, only the voice is invited in. A kettle completes its small aria in the kitchen and pours it into a mug that travels back to the couch, steam writing brief scripts the room can read and forget. A blanket with a modern pattern still knows the old job. The cat has taken the shape of your knees, which happen to be exactly the shape the cat prefers. Internet radio stations blossom like a night garden. Small, fragrant, fiercely tended by people who know the names of obscure genres and the birthdays of drummers. A button brings you to a studio in Reykjavik that plays clarinets at 3 a.m. Another slip the thumb lands you in Tokyo where someone is mixing rain recordings with ambient chords that lengthen time until it fits your breathing. Podcasts behave like the slow, careful friend who knows 3 stories for every mood. History told with patience that makes dates sit down and behave, essays that roll across the mind like good winter bread, audio dramas that resurrect the old Foley table with hard drives instead of drawers of marbles, with libraries of footsteps labelled by surface and shoe. Ads are there because bills exist, but they have learned to be less shout, more aside, tucked between paragraphs, sometimes read by the same voice that reads the story, which is a kind of permission. You find yourself eyeing a new brand of tea and smiling at your own predictability. Live radio still has that quickened pulse. A host looking at a chat window that moves like weather, while juggling tracks and callers, and the odd small emergency with a board that glows in sedate colours. Call-ins arrive like postcards. They travel through VoIP flutters rather than copper line hiss, but human nerves still lace them. Someone talks from a pickup on a midnight highway, the flats horizon hurrying alongside. Someone else speaks from a quiet dorm room with the duvet pulled over their head to dampen echo. A listener in a distant time zone sends a note that it's already tomorrow where they are, that they're making eggs while you are making bedtime, that the sun is biding its time in one place and already busy in another. A map blossoms in your mind unbidden. To the north, someone in a cabin warmed by a blue flame listens, on a speaker with a tired battery. To the south, someone in a warm kitchen shakes cinnamon into their coffee and turns the volume down for a moment when a child rolls over. The gear has multiplied, but the purpose hasn't. There's a tiny USB microphone on a desk in a tidy corner, humming with low noise and good intentions. There's an old cassette deck with a sentimental mouth that still eats tape once in a while. There's a Bluetooth radio that looks almost, but not quite, like the walnut cabinet your grandparent had. A hybrid that speaks both analog and app. Some people stack vinyl like stones around the hearth. Others stack playlists that have been tuned and retuned so often they function like diaries. There are little boxes that pretend to be tubes and little apps that actually are reverberation chambers. There are EQ curves shaped to make spoken words sit closer to the cheek. Music spread wider than the walls. The vocabulary of warmth, once orange filaments, now includes tape emulation, gentle saturation, soft knee, words that are simply different ways of saying be kind to my ears. When a record begins, the surface hiss is a new kind of rain. When an algorithm learns your late-night appetite, it becomes a concierge that mostly gets it right and sometimes doesn't. Those misses are charming too, like a friend suggesting a poem you end up disliking but discuss anyway. Communities have come forward out of the shadow where they used to sit. The comment section under an episode is a town square conducted in lowercase, with people trading weather from their countries and ages like stamps. Listening from Manila, 27, says one voice. Glasgow, 61, says another. Johannesburg, 14, with my gran who fell asleep already, says a third. The host reads those aloud sometimes, folding them into the show, and the room you're in seems to grow fingers that can touch shores you've never seen. Live chats have their own manners, moderators who sweep like custodians, regulars who keep extra chairs in their browsers for latecomers, little storms of heart emojis that pass and leave air that smells of bakery sugar. A lullaby request from someone whose day has been too loud gets met by a piano piece that behaves itself, and even people who don't like piano nod because the intention is right. Audiobooks pour through the same speakers like dignified rivers, their narrators trained to place paragraph breaks where grace lives. Some voices are gravely enough to hold old myths, some are crisp as apple skins and carry science like a tray of glasses that never clink. In the middle of a chapter, your smart lights lean down another few degrees of brightness without a fuss. The house learns your habits because you taught it with 1,000 taps, and now it gives them back as gifts. Thermostats that sigh at the hour your hands want warmer cups. Doorbells that know not to announce themselves. A fridge that decides to hum a little softer because the food is already cold and you don't need reminding. The ancient promise of technology, to serve without requiring worship, keeps almost coming true in the quiet part of the evening. Field recordings share their pilgrims' pockets, Icelandic hot springs breathing, a train finding its night path through pitch-black pine in a wash of distant clacking, a street market waking up with clinks and calls and the scratch of chalk on slate. ASMR arrives with a frankness that some people shrug at and others adore, a brush on fabric, pages turned with a choirmaster's patience, a slowly buttered slice of bread mic'd like a concerto. They work best when the intention is sincere, when the invitation is to notice how close the world can come when it wants to be gentle. You can move between these registries, the live station, the podcast, the hum of a city you have not visited, with the casual ballet of tabs and apps and remote controls that have learned to be as unassuming as light switches. Ritual evolves, elements persist. Tea is still tea, whether in a porcelain cup that belonged to someone you miss, or in a double-walled glass that came from a corner of the internet nobody has met in person. Blankets are still leagues of belonging. People still pass them without asking. The cat is older now, or is a dog, or is the place where a pet used to be and your hand still lands there anyway. Someone tends a candle. Someone else refers an oil diffuser that pretends to be a tiny humid cloud. Books still face down their spines when the voice in the room is better than the print for a while. Journals absorb the same 3 notes: time, show, a sentence that summarizes nothing and everything. Felt calmer. Missed her today. The song at 43:11. Some nights you're not alone and it shows. 2 pairs of headphones share a splitter like a wishbone. One person leans, the other tilts. 4 eyes remember how to close in unison. The show pauses when a story of your own rouses itself and asks to be told, and then it resumes with a backward flick of a scrub bar that is, if you squint hard enough, a dial. In another city, a friend starts the same episode at the same time, and you text a single emoji at the same minute, and the coincidence makes the ordinary room giddy. The voice in the stream says something that glances off your day exactly where you needed to be touched. Not healed or fixed, but touched. And you say, out loud to no one, yes, and the room absorbs the syllable like rain into thirsty soil. Elsewhere the old sets still glow. Somebody's grandfather's radio has been coaxed into the century with a small hidden receiver. Its tubes still orange the room with the conviction that things were never simple but often kindly arranged. A teenager who collects objects with stories spins a Bakelite die and posts a video that finds 1 million viewers who like the way it clicks. Repair shops have become confessionals where people bring machines that sat in attics for 40 years and ask if the past can be persuaded to talk. Sometimes it can, and a service manual with drawings like schoolbook margins does its part with the grace of a slow teacher. There is a moment in some of those shops where solder smells like pine, where a signal first clears its throat after decades, where the tech and the owner look at each other and nod as if a boat they built together has finally floated. The show that emerges could be anything. A static-laced station a continent away, a local DJ with a fondness for vinyl snaps, a weather channel reading river levels in a monotone that calms the mind, but the feeling is ancient and unremarkable. Sound as furniture, voice as neighbour, night as a room that accepts conditions and then suggests improvements. The analogue and the digital, the old and the now, keep shaking hands. A shortwave antenna strung between 2 apartment windows leans into a mood ring of sky. A phone the size of a pastry listens and interprets and hands you Russia, Peru, a fishing boat off Newfoundland, a numbers station that is probably a myth, but certainly not a lullaby. A streaming service offers 50 versions of the same nocturne, and you pick the one recorded with the mic too close because you like the breath. Always the breath. The reminder that performance contains a body in a room and a careful decision about where to place the chair. The house learns to nod along. Dishwasher delayed until dawn. Laundry paused. Do not disturb armed like a lighthouse lens that rotates and then covers the bulb for a half-second on each turn. Outside, the street adopts its midnight grammar. Few cars, 1 bicycle, 1 dog politely explaining himself to a tree. Inside, everything that can whisper does. And across thousands of rooms in as many places, a small census is being taken without clipboards. Who is here? What year were you born? What sky sits on top of your roof? What language first taught you to listen? People answer in the margins of apps, in live chat greetings, in the first seconds of a call. The catalogue expands 1 city and 1 age at a time. The host thanks them with the tone that knows how to thank without collecting debt. Somewhere you are part of that roll call, registered not by a name that must be remembered, but by the shape of your attention, which is the original currency of evenings like these. The show advances by paragraphs, by measures, by stories that know when to tuck themselves in and when to stand another minute by the window to see whether the rain intends to stay, or if it's just passing through on its way to another town where another lamp glows over another rug and another person adjusts a dial that now happens to be a bar of light drawn across glass by a fingertip that has learned, after all this time, the exact pressure that persuades the world to come close and speak softly. If you're still here with me, blanket pulled up, cup empty, the room settled into that kind of quiet that feels like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder, thank you for letting me sit in your evening. I like to think of us as a small constellation scattered across time zones and rooftops, sharing the same soft frequency for a little while. The light on your screen is probably turned down now. Maybe a pet has made a warm decision about your lap. Maybe the window is a square of night that seems to breathe along with you. The stories we wandered through were really just different rooms in the same house. The glow, the tuning, the voices, the small miracles of make-believe, the way the world slipped in and out with its shoes politely wiped. All of that belongs to you now, not as trivia, but as texture. The kind you can feel under your fingertips when the day tries to turn sharp. If it soothed you, if it sent you drifting, if it held your mind still enough to hear your own breath being kind to you, that's the point. Before you go, tell me a little about how your nights sound. What's the ritual where you live? Is there a lamp that knows your face, a cup that knows your hands, a song you trust the way sailors trust a lighthouse? Share a memory if you have one. Maybe you listened to baseball through a summer window, or stayed up late with a cousin to hear a spooky drama that wasn't quite as brave as you both pretended to be. Or you found a station by accident one storm and it kept you company until the power blinked back on. If you never met radio the old way, tell me what your version looks like now, a playlist that always finds the right piano, a podcast that has become the voice you fold laundry with, a station halfway around the globe that somehow understands your mornings. Your comments become part of this show's afterglow. They're how strangers meet each other in a gentle place and say, "Oh, you too." If this quiet corner helped, a soft tap on the like button really does tell the algorithm what we're trying to do here. And a subscribe is like leaving a porch light on so you can find your way back next time without stumbling. If you want more nights like this, you can press that little bell and ask it to ring at a reasonable hour. It will learn our bedtime manners. But no pressure. This is a no-pressure neighbourhood. The door is never locked, and there's always room on the couch. If you'd rather keep tonight as a one-time postcard you tuck into a book and rediscover later, that's beautiful too. You're welcome either way. If your eyes are heavy, let them be. If they aren't, sit a minute longer in the half-light and listen to what the room sounds like when nothing is trying to be important. Somewhere in the wiring of your headphones or the small lungs of your speakers, a little colony of electrons has done so much travelling to bring you these syllables, and now their work is almost done. You can close apps like closing blinds one by one, gentle as pulling quilts. Dim the screen until it becomes a polite reflection of your own face, the face that did its best today. Breathe the kind of breath you wanted to take all afternoon but kept saving for later. This is later. Take it now. There's a good chance someone else is finishing the sentence with you from a different continent. Their kettle quiet, their night insects louder, their streetlight shape not quite the same as yours. I like knowing that. It means when you leave a line in the comments, a city name, an age, a small ritual, the map of our little radio night world gets another star pinned to it. We're not fixing the world here. We're doing something smaller and tonight maybe more useful. Learning the art of low volume together. A skill you can carry back into the big noise when you have to. A place you can return to when you don't. I'll be here again, with another slow door to open and a chair that doesn't mind being pulled closer to the speaker. Until then, may your house behave, may your tea steep properly, may your blankets remember your shape, and may the next voice you hear, whether it's a human voice or the honest tick of a clock, speak to you with mercy. When you're ready, you can let the light go and keep the warmth. Good night, friend. Or good morning if the sun has already found you. Either way, thank you for lending me your ears and your quiet. I'll meet you on the same frequency whenever you wish.